Hey, and welcome to another Canopy training video. In this video, we're going to go through the typical workflow for a pen tester. Okay, so once I've logged into Canopy, I first see the dashboard. Now, the dashboard helps us get to what we need to be working on as quickly as possible. So right away, I can see my recent phases here, which are the assessments that I've been working on. And I can also see recent reports. So they might be my reports that I've been working on, or they could be reports that my colleagues have requested collaboration on. So we're going to focus on our own test for the moment before we get to the report. So let's go ahead and click here on the Death Star 101. And I can see that this test is pre-empty. So this is a new test that's due to start now. You can see that it's in the active stage. So once it's active, I want to start adding information to the test. Okay, so I can start off by adding findings or assets, or if we're using methodologies, I might add methodologies. If I've set this test up myself, it's obviously down to me to add whatever's required, but tests may be set up for you. So depending on how your team is structured, you might have people who are responsible for provisioning all of the tests and test requirements, etc. Okay, so first of all, we're going to add some assets just to show you how to do that really quickly. Now, there's different ways of getting assets into the system. So we can just type in a list of assets like this, or of course we could cut and paste from a file, and that will give us a list of assets. But also if we're using tool data, if there are any assets or targets associated with those tools, so very typical if you're doing like a network assessment or a web app assessment, that information will be automatically imported from the tool data, so you won't have to populate it manually. Okay, so we go on to our findings interface. So findings are really the main aspect of what the pen tester will be working with. So in some areas they'll call them vulnerabilities or misconfigurations. The language varies across the industry on this, but in Canopy we call those findings. So there's different ways of getting your findings into the system. So you can add your findings from the knowledge base. So the knowledge base is where the reusable vulnerability or finding write-ups are stored. So this is maintained for each team because obviously each team may have a specific way of working that suits them. And it's really easy to build up and maintain over time. The important thing to note here is that we've got access to a list of approved quality write-ups that are maintained by our team. So in this instance, we're working on a web application assessment. So if we've categorized our knowledge base, we can filter based on web app findings. Okay, and we could like even sub-classify that if we wanted to. But in this case, we're going to select a few of these findings and add them into Canopy. Now, Canopy doesn't force you to add your findings at any particular point during the test. Personally, I think it's useful to add findings as you find them, because then you don't have to come back and re-verify things at the end of an engagement. You verify as you go. And it also allows you to do things like end-of-day reporting or critical notifications, and that's really dependent on whether the clients have those requirements for you. But if you take that type of approach, it's very easy to then support that type of a workflow from Canopy. Okay, you can also add a manual finding, which we won't really do here because it's just filling in a form for the finding. Okay, and you can also get tool data into the system, which will automatically take results from your tool and convert them into Canopy findings. So in this instance, this is a web app assessment, so we're going to drop in some burp data here. So it's just simple drag and drop of the burp report XML file. Okay, that'll take a few seconds to import. And then we can see that our findings have been updated here. So we've added a bunch of findings that have come from the knowledge base, and we've also automatically imported findings from the tools. You can see in some cases, the source is also a tool and it's linked to a knowledge base automatically. What that means is that in this case, we have worked on this type of finding before. We've linked it to a tool, in this case burp. And what will happen is when we're importing that data from the tool, instead of using the vendor write-up, we're going to use our own custom write-up. So that's a good way of us being able to customize the findings of vulnerabilities in the system, and even to augment the data that's been given to us by the tool. So if we have custom rating systems, or we use specific tags and so on that the tools don't support, you can augment the data coming from the tools with your own data set, so to make it more customized and specific to your requirements. Okay, so we're going to log in, open one of these findings and have a look. So this is our write-up, and we can see that we've got some evidence down here. Now Canopy splits up evidence in a very specific way, and we've done this because it seems like there's a lot of commonality in tools that are out there in the industry. You'll typically have the finding description, you'll have the targets that that finding relates to, and then you'll have the evidence that links those two things together, right? So the evidence is really how is this finding affecting that specific target. So we follow a very similar structure, and once you understand that, it's a very flexible way of storing evidence in the system. So in this case, the evidence is being automatically imported from Burp. So we'll go ahead and open that, and we can see we've pre-styled this in code blocks. Those code blocks would be styled inside of your report template if you're using report templates and have an evidence style defined in them. So you can really be nice and flexible with that. And if we wanted to add our own, pieces of evidence here, maybe we want to add screenshots to this. It's very easy for us. Let's see, on Windows, we can just take a screenshot and add that directly. Or indeed, we could take screenshots from our file system and just drag and drop them in as well. So we can take another screenshot from here and drag that in. Screenshots can also have captions set in them. So if you go and enable the caption flag on the image, you can then, this is a real caption, okay? And that will be added into your report as a specific caption in the report document if that's what you use. Okay, evidence or examples also has some additional information here. So there's some meta information that's captured that's populated based on what the tool will provide, or if you're creating a manual piece of evidence, it's exactly the same way, you just have to fill in this information manually. You'll also see that you can include evidence in a report or not. So if you've got lots of evidence, let's say you're doing a vulnerability assessment and you don't want to include all of that evidence, you can be selective. And we also allow you to star evidence. So you might have specific pieces of evidence that you want to appear in sections of the report. So you can use this to be selective on, let's say, putting starred pieces of evidence in the main body of the report and then putting all of the other pieces of evidence in an appendix, for example, right? But that's really down to report templates and their customization, which is covered in a separate video. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and save our piece of evidence. Okay, and that will bring us back to our finding. Now within the finding, we can modify this content as well. This is obviously from a template write-up, but this is a copy of the template. So we can modify this locally for our engagements. That allows us to tune the write-ups for each test that we're working on. Now obviously, if you've got an excellent set of recommendations, you should probably stick to those as much as possible, but there's going to be variance in relation to the background or the detail and so on, right? So you can tune that to the specific needs of the engagement. And there's some additional options over here. So you can store references. In this case, we've got a CWE reference, which has also come from Burp. We might want to use comments for commenting on particular findings if we're collaborating with our colleagues. In this case, because this finding has been imported from a tool, we retain the original finding because we've now used our template finding, right, for getting that automated write-up. In this particular instance, this has come from Burp, so we would have the original Burp write-up if we need to access that. We also have tickets, so if you need to link this to a ticket, if you're using Jira, for example, you can link that to a Jira ticketing system. So you can create tickets in your Jira systems based on the vulnerabilities and findings you're capturing inside of Canopy, but we'll cover that separately. Okay. If we do need to make any modifications, we just go into full edit mode. We can change these. We can obviously change the title. We've got a simple critical to info rating system here. There's also built-in support for CVSS2 and CVSS3. If we need to give it a CVSS3 rating, we can open our CVSS3 calculator and we can start giving it some settings here. Okay, this may not make sense for this particular finding, but just to illustrate it. Okay. And if you have like a custom rating system for your particular organization, that can also be supported and it can be used to override these settings automatically. So, but yeah, we might, come down here, modify our detail section. Okay, we don't have any source code. This is where, let's say we choose to include a screenshot in here as well. So anywhere that you see what you see is what you get editor like this, you're able to work with screenshots as well and any sort of custom formatting. So if we needed to, let's say, put in some observations as a bullet list, we could do that. Okay, item 1. and so on. So these particular fields will then be converted into the correct formats inside of your report templates. Okay, so again, we're going to go ahead and save that. Okay, so we've added in findings from our knowledge base, and we've also imported findings from our tool, in this case Burp. In some cases we might have findings which we're not particularly interested in because they don't contain interesting information. So we might choose to delete those, or if we want to retain the information for audit purposes, we can just ignore them. So by ignoring these findings, they won't be output in the report. But you can go back into Canopy and view them if you need to do that at any particular point. Okay, so the reason why we might do this is to ensure that we're giving a good quality set of findings to our end users. Sometimes you need to report on volume information, but in many cases it's getting a nice concise report to the person that needs to read it. If you're giving them a 500-page report, yes, that may be useful from an audit perspective, but it's very difficult to make decisions and make action plans out of that type of a document. Okay, so one other final step we might take to condense our findings is to use grouping. Okay, so grouping is very simple. We select the findings that we want to group together. None of these findings would really make that much sense to group together, but we'll just go ahead and select these two for illustration purposes. Okay, so we select the findings we want to add to a group. Then we can create a group from a knowledge base entry. That might be a predefined group that we've already defined for use within the system, or we might group it to an existing finding. So this is pretty useful. Any finding can be promoted to a group. You just add a member to it. And this can be pretty useful if you're testing over multiple days. So if you're collecting on data on different days, and you might have created a group on day one, let's say SSL TLS misconfigurations, for example, and you've collected new data on days 2 and 3, you don't have to create new groups. You can just add new members to the existing groups, right? So you can expand that group over time. And if you don't have anything that you want to put it into, you can create a new group. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to copy the content from each of those findings because we want to massage that into our write-up. So that will just save us having to go into each of those member findings to copy and paste data out. So we'll give this a arbitrary group. And we need to set a rating. So again, if you've got a custom rating system or anything like that, you can use that here. Okay. And if we need to give it CVSS ratings or anything like that, we can do that. So but we're just going to go ahead and create the group here. So this creates a group for us. You can see it's merged all the different content. It's merged the references. It's merged the write-ups. If there's any evidence, it will also have merged that as well. So now we can start working on this to turn it into the write-up that we want to have output in the report. And if this is a group that we find interesting, we can just select an option here to add it back into the KB. Now by default, that will add it to the knowledge base as a draft finding. So someone with knowledge base permissions will need to approve that. That might be you, it might not be you. It depends on how those access permissions are granted in the organization. But it's very easy to build up the knowledge base over time and really make that quite focused on the types of work that you're doing. Okay, so we'll go back to our test phase here. Now, in this instance, we've reduced our finding set down to a total of 6 findings for a report. In some engagements, obviously, you're going to have many more findings and many more assets. Like if you're doing an internal network assessment, you could have several hundred or several thousand assets and an equal number of findings. That's fine. Canopy will give you the tools to compress and condense that down into something useful. But yeah, really, this will vary based on different types of assessments. Before we go and create a report, these notifications are available here. So if you need to send out notifications based on different stages of the engagement, you can do that. These notifications can be configured by a person with the correct permissions on the system. So these can be tuned, they can be extended, etc. Highly customizable, and they're only used if you need to use them. If you don't need to use them, that specific feature can be disabled. So when we want to create a report, we need to go out to our project level, So projects is the top level container where you could have one or multiple test phases. So you might break a project down into separate test phases. So let's say application, mobile, and so on. And you might even have retest phases associated with that. Again, that might be your responsibility within Canopy, or it might not. It really depends on how the project management is being done within your team. So we store reports at this level as well, because reports can then be linked to one or multiple phases, and you might have different types of reports. So you might have a requirement to produce a daily summary report, which might have a specific format. Then you might have a end of engagement full assessment format and an end of engagement and executive summary report, right? So there's lots of flexibility to support different types of delivery requirements. So here we'll go to reports. We'll create a new report. So we select the report type that we want here. We're going to create our full pen test report. Okay, we select the phases that are in scope for that. So we only have one here. So, and then we can start filling out some data. So we'll just put in a target name here, because some of these fields may be used in your report, some of them may not be. And some of the data will be set automatically based on defaults or based on information that's already set at the project level. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and save that. And so this gives us our report layout. Now it's important to note that this is a sample report in this training system. Your report might look completely different to this, right? So Canopy is quite flexible and allows you to adapt to your specific reporting needs. So don't be surprised if this looks different to the report that's on your system. Now at this point, we can send the report off for QA or peer review, but we'll cover that in a separate video, because there's lots of different options you can consider as part of the PR and QA processes. So right now, even though our document is still in draft, we can go ahead and create it. So we might want to modify these canned sections. So we have pre-canned content in here for summarizing information. In some reports, this is completely automatable. You don't need to touch anything. In other types of reports, you might want to be more dynamic and really sort of write highly customized summary sections, right? So that really is down to each individual team on how they want to use Canopy. In this instance, we're just going to leave this the way it is. But just to show you, these are fields that are also what you see is what you get fields. So if you need to have rich text formatting or use images in those, then that's also possible. So we'll go ahead and create a report. The reports, there might be different types of report mappings, so like for different types of branding or different types of approaches. In most cases, it's probably a one-to-one mapping, but there's flexibility if you need to map that to have a one-to-many type of mapping with your reports output documents. Okay, so in this instance, we'll select the sample. The rest of the defaults you can pretty much leave the way they are. That's typically set up by the people who are creating the templates. And then we can go ahead and generate the report. So the report generation is an async process. If you have notifications enabled in the system, Canopy will notify you via email. It will also send in-app notifications. Once your report is ready, you can then download it in the specific file type that you want. So you can see here it's by default MS Word, Excel, and PDF. And once you've downloaded it, you can then send it off to your clients, either via email, or if you've got a distribution portal, or if you're using Canopy Portal. Okay, so that pretty much covers this basic overview video for today. If you have any questions, please get in contact with us. And if you'd like to see any more videos, please let us know. Thank you.